We welcome all of you as the CEO and one of the founders of Luminary Publishing House. One of the things that we are focused on is embracing and empowering and supporting and uplifting those writers and authors who are often overlooked, who are often go unheard. It is one of the founding principles. It's part of our founding values. It's just morally right. And here at Luminary, we try our best to always do the right thing, even when it's difficult. And so tonight, we want to focus on the fact that we all have voices, and especially as women in these days and times, our voices are oh so important. And what most people don't think about is words hold power, whether it's spoken word, whether it's written word, words hold power. Now, I'll tell you tonight, this is a come as you are. So you will see we're not all gussied up. We are not trying to be something that we're not. We're coming from our own homes, comfortable environments. We've got tea, water, wine, you name it. Um, you are asked to be just as comfortable as we are. We hope that you are in a comfortable spot. I'm going to give you 1 or 2 minutes. If you haven't already done so, grab something to drink, grab a snack. Please feel free to use the chat as we go along. If you have questions, if there is something that we are talking about and you want more information, please put it in the chat. I am recording this. The chat will be recorded as well. So if we do not get to your question on the call tonight, we will absolutely circle back with you. But if you have something that's burning, if you want to hear a little bit more about something that one of our authors talks about, put it in the chat. That way, if we have the opportunity to, we can address it here tonight. And if not, we will follow up later. So for those of you that just joined, please put in the chat where you're from, what state or what country. We've got Florida, New York, Scotland on the line right now. Fort Walton Beach, another Florida was there. And again, we are talking about the courage to speak, the fact that words hold power. So before we jump in, all right, another Pensacola, Florida, that's awesome. So before we jump in, we are going to do some rapid fire questions for our authors, just giving them an opportunity to talk a little bit about themselves and their thoughts and feelings before we jump in to the main content tonight. So authors, I'm going to go around. I'm just going to randomly pick, but let's just start with the question. The first question is, what's one word that captures your voice right now? So let's start with Mary. Mary, what's one word that captures your voice right now?
I want to say courage.
Courage. Okay, I like it. Dolly, one word that captures your voice.
Authentic.
Authentic. Deborah,
Provocative.
provocative. CG,
Resolute.
resolute. Very strong words. Okay. Um, let's stick with you, CJ. What's the last thing you said out loud that felt powerful?
So I posted a thread on Threads, which is kind of like Twitter for those of you who are not on Threads, but it was a post about how angry I am that so much of my daughter's life has kind of been stolen by worry about cataclysm and the leadership of my country, and just kind of connecting with other people who feel the same way felt really powerful, and just like saying it out loud.
Nice. Okay. What's the last thing that you said out loud that felt powerful, Mary?
I am going to have to say I made the comment that I did not consent to that.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's very powerful.
yeah. I don't know
Okay.
if you guys want any background, but I could just leave it like that. I did not consent to that.
Okay. I think that that's powerful in itself without the extra context. Yeah, I like that. Thank you for sharing it.
Mhm.
Deborah, what about you? What's the last thing you said out loud that felt powerful?
Reminding my mom in February that she had it fixed with God and it was okay to let go.
Yeah, very powerful. Okay. And Dolly, what about you? Last thing you said out loud that felt powerful.
Probably conversation last night with my trans had been my niece, and just an open conversation for the first time I've seen her in 3 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Um, what's one thing that instantly strengthens your voice, Deborah?
Is prayer and the Psalms.
Okay.
Hmm.
CJ.
I think kind of moving past my fear and my doubts that come from my fear, and just like stating what I know to be true, to be absolutely true.
Okay. Mary Beth, what about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say, is just probably listening to that still small voice inside and knowing that what I'm doing um, is my mission or my destiny or something along that lines.
Okay. I like that. Dolly, what about you? What's one thing that instantly strengthens your voice?
Simply being authentic and sincere in what I'm saying.
Mm, I like that. I'm gonna add in, I hadn't planned to answer, but I think it's important for tonight. I think what strengthens my voice is other voices, other like-minded individuals and voices. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to pull all of you together, is to think about, and in our audience, all of us have a voice, whether we found it or not yet. And sometimes that connection, that community, when you find that community, helps you be able to use your voice if you found it but don't feel comfortable yet. And I think that we are strong in numbers, right? Um, what's a recent moment you chose to speak up? Let's go with you, Dolly.
It wasn't oral, it was written.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A month or so ago, I published a long, wound up being top of the page editorial entitled Diversity Phobia. And that is exactly what it was addressing, that it seems to be almost a phobia now for some
Mm,
people, akin to being having a phobia about spiders and therefore wanting to kill all spiders instead of having any care about it.
got it. Okay. Um, that's huge. And I agree. I think there's been like a huge pendulum swing, right, over the last in the recent year. So yeah. CG, what about you? What's a recent moment you chose to speak up?
So just publishing my debut, I think, was a huge moment for me to speak up about a lot of things. My grief over losing my father suddenly. It was a lot of processing. Sort of raising a child in this world right now, and sort of like taking some of my like fears and anxieties out to the nth degree, and like, watching them play out through my fiction.
Mm,
On a more like physical note, I've been attending local like protests, No King's Days type gatherings and other sort of community events where we're, just gathering to commiserate in some ways, but also to stand for something.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just being like physically in a space with other people that feel the same has felt very empowering lately. So, and I think it's important.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
What about you, Mary?
So,
What's
like
a recent
Dolly,
moment?
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
like Dolly, mine was written. And
Okay.
so this, I entered, I wouldn't say a contest, but we were asked to write something with regards to the 250th anniversary of the United States.
Mm,
So I wrote it from the perspective of an Indigenous person.
Oh,
mm.
So, and that was recent, yesterday, as a matter of fact.
oh,
So,
wow.
yeah. So that should be quite surprising to the people I submitted it to. So, but I mean, everybody's celebrating the 250th anniversary, which I understand. I am an American and things of that nature, but I'm also an Indigenous person. So looking at it from that perspective. We were already here and you're celebrating, I don't know. Yeah. So
Yeah. Okay. I
That's
appreciate that.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Deborah, what about you? What's a recent moment you chose to speak up?
So mine would be on the issue of immigration because a lot of people have the attitude of us and them.
Mm,
And I personally feel that we can and need to solve this problem with dignity and have a fair and balanced approach. Because
mhm,
at the end of the day, the government basically stole the land that we are living on and
mhm,
then made this country a wealthy nation with the labor from another stolen people, stolen from another continent.
mhm.
And so my take is nobody gets up in the morning and says, gee, I think that I'm going to leave the country that I live in, pack up my entire family and my children, and take a perilous journey of many days and miles because I have nothing better to do.
That's true. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
I
So
love, oh, go
go ahead,
ahead.
Dolly.
Well, just building on that, I love to say, including to members of my own family, I would not be here and we would not be here had our grandfather not been escaping a murder route in Lebanon and become a stowaway to get here illegally. I love to say that. And that all of the people in our family who have done so much good over now 2 or 3 generations, we would not be here if it had not been from that first illegal immigrant. And I think
Mm,
many heritage stories have some similarities.
Yes.
And people need to be reminded of that. You know, your best friend, your cousin, your whatever, may be somebody who's a descendant of an illegal immigrant.
that's fair. That's fair. So, for those that have just recently joined us, we were just doing some initial rapid fire questions so you could get to know a little bit more about the perspectives of the authors tonight. If you were not here in the beginning, we're talking about the fact that words hold power, and that's written word or it's voiced word. And we're going to start diving in now. So, for those of you that don't know about Luminary, Luminary was founded with the clear and specific intent to focus on diverse voices. And that word diverse can be used in a multitude of ways. What we mean by diverse is diverse backgrounds, diverse in culture, diverse in tradition, diverse in race, diverse in religion and belief. Um, but mainly those authors, those writers that are often overlooked. So, diverse in identity and how they identify, diverse in race, not just women, those that are neurodiverse. And our authors tonight, just in the little bit that you've already heard, while not all of them or most of them are not luminary authors, they are authors that and writers that depict what Luminary is all about and also vocal. So, what we hope you take away from this today is through the conversation that these authors have tonight, the discussion. And again, please use chat if you have questions or want to dig deeper into something. Um, is that you are not alone. Whether you have found your voice yet, or if you know that you have a voice, but you haven't quite gotten comfortable enough to use it, you're not alone. And hopefully you will be inspired by some of the like-minded ladies on this call. So I'm going to jump in. Our very first question tonight is what early experiences or defining moments first made you realize that silence wasn't an option for you, especially around race, politics, or environmental justice? And before I turn it over to the authors, I'll say, for me, growing up as a multi ethnic woman in the South, I learned at a very young age that I didn't fit in really anywhere. I didn't fit in with my black schoolmates. I didn't fit in with my white schoolmates. I was either too black or not black enough. I, used to have all the threats made, and at some point I developed at a young age a skin, and I don't want to call it thick yet, but a skin that I would respond and I would say, well, I'm chocolate vanilla swirl ice cream, baby. I've got the best of both worlds. And that would usually shut people down. But I'll tell you, I didn't own that all the way until I got to be an adult. And as I worked the last 30 years in the corporate world, a lot in DE&I, before DE&I had that title and was sexy trendy, I really learned about the ugliness of the corporate world. And then in the publishing world in the last several years, I found out about the ugliness in the publishing world. And that is why we are here today, because it is so important that those that have a voice, they may not be able to open a publishing company to be able to help support people, but there are things that you can do. You can use your creative gifts that you've been given to write, to speak, or just to bring a small community together. So, authors, I am going to ask that question again and go around the board. What early experiences or defining moments first made you realize that silence wasn't an option for you, especially if it had to do anything with race, politics, or environmental justice? Um, Deborah, what about you?
So one of my earliest memories, and probably the most painful memory, I was about 4 years old, and we were stationed at, my dad was stationed at Keesler Air Force Base, his only stateside assignment out of 21 years. And my brother and I was about 4, and he was about 3. And my mother didn't know. We left the backyard, and we were going to find some kids to play with. And so we went walking across the backyards. They were joined together, and these were the 1950s style cinder block houses. So we walked across all the backyards, and we went down until we found a street adjoining the neighborhoods. And I think they were mostly military type families. And so we found some kids that were playing. It was 3 white boys and 1 little white girl in the yard. And the 3 boys started screaming, "Niggers go home, niggers go home." And I had never heard that word used, to the best of my knowledge, and certainly never been called it. And it was so venomous and so frightening that it struck fear in me.
Even without knowing what it meant.
Right. Even without knowing what it meant. And so I just remember clutching my brother's hand and turning around and heading, almost running back across the yards. But what particularly, besides the fear, sticks in my mind about that day to this day, and I'm 67 years old, is the little white girl. She had on a dress just like I had on, little white bobby socks just like I had on, and she was standing behind the 3 boys. I remember the incredible shame that I felt. And she didn't say a word. And I just felt so much shame that day.
Thank you for sharing that vulnerability.
Yeah. We never left the yard again after that day, the entire time that we lived in Mississippi. And we never told my mother that we left the yard.
Thank you for sharing that. So, Carolyn, what early experiences or defining moments first made you realize that silence wasn't an option?
So I grew up, a white kid in New York State, blue state, and with fairly liberal parents. So I did, kind of have the chatter of progressivism in my house. But the first time I really remember having like a very strong visceral reaction to the politics of what was going on was the Iraq War. So I was, a sophomore in high school when 9/11 happened. I remember I saw the second plane hit in chemistry class. It's like burned. I remember what I was wearing that day. And it's just burned into my memory. And just feeling the absolute like righteousness of the anti-war position at that time. So, I was a little 17-year-old, 16-year-old, whatever, on the street corner with like the three little other protesters that would come out. And, like I just felt so strongly that like people just needed to be educated. And we were in these wars under false pretenses, but people could be sort of educated out of those positions. And obviously, that's just not the case. Like clearly looking at, the situation
Yeah.
we're in and the world we're in right now. So I think kind of, I sort of miss sometimes who I was at, 15, 16, 17, and just feeling like, well, if people just had the right information, if they had the right facts, if they weren't watching Fox News or whatever it might be, we can educate our way out of this. And that's part of why I became a teacher, frankly, is to, educate people into not necessarily thinking the way that I do, but at least questioning things,
Yeah.
right?
That's a great
And
way of using your voice.
yeah, and coming to maybe not the same conclusion that I would come to, but at least having the foundation, right, to make good choices and to make good civic choices. So I think now there's a lot of disillusionment, especially in the progressive community, that we just you can't necessarily educate people out of faulty beliefs systems.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Mary, what about you? What are those early experiences or defining moments, or what's one of them?
Okay. So race and environment, so both. So I'm white passing, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but there was an incident in like third grade. We were, me and a young boy were putting up, a white boy, were putting up some art supplies after we had just done a project in class. So apparently I had dropped something, hit his foot. Of course, it was an accident. We're in third grade. And he called me a spick. And like Deborah, I had not heard the word before. I did not really know what it meant, but I could hear people, and maybe it could have been a teacher, gasping. And she came and quickly, walked the boy away. So apparently, then I knew obviously it was not good. So when I went home, I had a conversation with my parents. I told them what happened and what he called me, and I could tell by the look on my parents' face that it was obviously not a good word. So then at that point, they told me about words we never use and words we don't let other people use that are around us. So that was one incident of, knowing when to speak up, not just for myself, but for others, not letting, people use racial slurs or anything else against other people. And then as far as environment, we were just, that was instilled in me at as early age as the indigenous part, love the land, respect the land. We always, when we went to, if we went hiking or we went to national parks or state parks, we always carried bags with us and cleaned up after other people. And that's just how that whole thing was instilled in me. And that was, I remember always doing that from second grade on to whenever now.
Yeah. Very, very honorable, very amazing, and so needed. I mean, look at where we are as as a world. Thank you for that, Mary. Dolly, what about you? What's an early experience or a defining moment for you?
Well, I have to say, I feel like I was born as simply a creative expressive. That I can take no credit for that. I was born an artist and writer. I was aware of that from a very young age, and I feel like that colored everything else.
Hmm.
Um, I have had a deep interest in other cultures and a desire to get away from my roots, actually, which was a small town in Louisiana, a very racist small town. I don't think the racism part of it. Well, I did have a moment when I was a child that I'll never forget, and I was sitting in the car waiting for my mother, and I was probably 4 years old, five at the most, and I smiled at a little black girl, and she stuck out her tongue at me. And I didn't have any idea why she would do that. It really perplexed me because at that time I knew nothing. I knew nothing of racial issues or whatever. I filed that away decades later when I was doing some work with Black studies and communicating across race. Um, I read a poem that talked about that in reverse. I think it was Gwendolyn Brooks. I haven't looked at that in a long time. But I related so much to that poet because I thought, she experiences the same thing I experienced. But in college, I was extremely aware of the racial, which is the 60s. I'm a little different age than some of you here. In the 60s, I was in college, and my hometown, Bogalusa, was one of the hot spots. Not as famous as Selma, but it was absolutely one of the hot spots. And all the town was talking about was the outside agitators coming in and, the whole issue. And by that time, I was extremely concerned about civil rights and really wanted civil rights to happen. And I was very much unusual in my world, not only Bogalusa,
Mm,
but even in my college, which was an hour away. Um, there was more awakening there. It wasn't quite Bogalusa, but it was still limited, and there was just a lot less interest. And by the way, nothing was integrated at that point.
right,
Uh,
right.
yeah, so in college, there was one black boy that I can remember in one of my sociology classes. But in
Wow.
general, it was a world apart. And I just knew that I wanted to work toward the opposite of that and did. After I graduated, I actually taught Black Studies in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is kind of weird for a girl from Bogalusa. A white girl from Bogalusa taught really one of the, if not the first Black Studies in a high school, certainly in the South. And
Right.
all of that just really came from the roots of just naturally being a thinker and a feeler and an empath and a creative, expressive person. And I
Wow.
think
Thank you
if
for
you,
that.
I think if you are those things, you naturally find ways.
Hmm.
You find issues that are important and that you care about, and you find ways to address them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dolly. Thank you to all of our authors. So I'm gonna jump into thinking about less about race and the politics side of it. We'll come back to that, of course, but I'd really like to ask CG. I'll ask you first, and then Mary, I'll come to you. When the world feels resistant to hearing women speak boldly, what keeps you returning to the page anyway?
Um, I think it's kind of twofold. I want my daughter to have the opportunity to live out her dreams, and I'm turning 40 in a couple of weeks. And I still have dreams that I want to live out. So,
Yeah.
I think as millennials, we've been kind of like, capped at the knees, in a lot of ways. So, it's maybe it's selfish of me to want a at least a better short term, future,
Right.
to live out my dreams. But looking long term, I want, the kids that I teach, the kid that I'm raising to have a world where, she can live out her dreams, and it's about justice, it's about equity. Um, when I write, like it's cathartic. So it's
Mm.
working through, a lot of things that I'm thinking about and feeling, and knowing very well that other people relate to it. And I think knowing the more I speak, the more, I think Brandy, you said something about this earlier, the more like it's almost like a mirror reflected back at you. People are relating, right?
Yes.
And
When it
that
resonates.
exciting.
Mhm.
So, my book's only been out since April, but I'm already hearing from readers that like you said that in a way that I couldn't quite express, but like it feels true.
Right.
And so that is one of the biggest motivators, I think, is to like for me to put out what I'm thinking and feeling, and then to reflect that back to somebody else who really needs to see their reflection in something.
Yeah. Makes sense. Mary, how do you navigate the tension? But sorry, how does the world, when the world feels resistant to hearing women speak boldly, like what keeps you returning back to that page anyway?
Just out of sheer necessity. I mean, I'm going to speak louder if I'm getting resistance. And it's not to cause conflict or anything of that nature, but nobody should be silenced, whether you agree with what they're saying or not. That's just not that's just not how the world should be designed, even though, that's happening in a lot of places now, especially here in the US. But so I just move forward because not that I think my word is or what I say is any more important than anybody else, but I hope that when people see me speaking up about an issue, they feel encouraged to do the same. So
Right.
it starts with one, and then hopefully it gathers many.
Yes, I like that. Starts with one and gathers many. Mary, we're going to stay with you. So, how do you navigate the tension between personal vulnerability and like public responsibility when you choose to speak out? You engage in a lot of, events around the environment. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Um, that's a really good question, but as far as personal vulnerability, I'm not even really sure that it is something that um, really affects me, if that makes sense. It's almost like Dolly was saying earlier. It, this is my calling, so it's not like I have a choice,
Gosh.
So this is who I was put on. This is my mission in life, and this is why I'm here on Earth. Um,
Mm.
so as with regards to the public aspect of it, I can only hope that people will listen and take tidbits of that what they can and incorporate it into their lives, into their philosophies. And as what's been said earlier, of course, I can't make them feel or think what I think, but I hope it at least opens them up to new thoughts and ideas and gets them thinking um, about different aspects and how and our relationship specifically with nature and the earth and how we should actually be. We're not separate from it; we're part of it, and how we should actually be protecting our earth.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Mhm.
So, in short response, what internal compass guides you when you decide which issues demand your voice most urgently? Let's go with CG.
So again, I as a mom, as an educator, I just think it's what feels most like I have to protect my babies, right? What's
Yeah,
most threatening to my babies? What's most threatening to my students? What's most threatening to my daughter? So I'm an English teacher, but the climate crisis is something that has kept me awake since I was a teenager.
Got it.
So I'm like especially like tickled to hear from Mary tonight, particularly about like how do you avoid like doomerism in your work? And you know, like it's just such a huge, overwhelming, you know, existential that all the other problems seem so small in comparison.
Hmm.
So like how do
Hmm.
you do your work in a way that, you know, adequately addresses the problem, but also is not caving to doomerism or, you know,
Yeah.
like so it's almost like irresponsible to be um too fatalistic about something, right? And I feel that way with our politics too. I feel like if we kind of give voice to the fatalistic or doomeristic aspects of anything, and we don't speak out with some hope, that is in itself also kind of irresponsible as people who have a platform, or who are, you know, shouting out our truth. Like if we can't if we can't give a little hope to people as well, like you know, what are we kind of doing with our platforms? So I think when I choose something to speak about, it's because I feel like it needs attention, but also because I feel like there's work that we can do.
Got it. Thank you. Deborah, I'd like to have you follow that up. What internal compass guides you when you decide which issues demand your voice most urgently? What guides you?
So I think that my moral compass is always being recalibrated by a power that's greater than myself. Um, so I think that that power helps me decide which issues are most urgent. Um, and those issues are the ones that I tend to speak out on. Um, and I think that I don't have a problem at this age because there's more years behind me than there are ahead of me. So I don't have a problem bending my knee at this point in my life. I'm also more salty and more no nonsense at this age too.
So let's clarify something. When you say bend the knee, for our audience members here, talk about what you mean by bend the knee just real quick, because bend the knee could mean more than one thing. I assume you're thinking about it from a religious perspective, from like a spiritual perspective, right?
From
Okay.
a, from a
Not
spiritual
to the administration. Let's be
from
clear.
from a spiritual perspective.
Got it.
Yeah, from a spiritual perspective is what I mean,
Yeah.
because the salty means that I don't bend the knee.
Yes. There we go. There we go. All
And the
right.
no
Perfect.
nonsense means I don't bend the knee.
Got it. Got it. Thank
Yeah,
you
so
for
I'm
that.
talking about from a spiritual perspective.
Got
Um,
it.
I like to think that I hear better than I used to.
Got it.
And I'm a little bit less stubborn in some ways and more stubborn in other ways than I used to be. Um, but I think that my that I allow my moral compass to continuously be recalibrated. I think that the issues that I pay attention to are the issues that are most pressing, that affect us all and
Mm,
affect the greatest number of people. They're the issues that are hot button issues with all of us.
got
The
it.
immigration, women's rights, voting issues,
Democracy.
the things that are before us every day, war, the things that are going on, Ukraine, Iran, Gaza, just the things that are in the news constantly,
Mhm.
the things that are unresolved. Yeah, those are the things that keep me awake at night, um, and that are before me every morning over a cup of tea.
Got
Yeah.
it. Thank you for that. So, Mary, I want to ask you, what internal compass guides you when you decide like the issues that demand your voice most urgently? Deborah just mentioned there's so many, and I know that's how I feel. I want to jokingly, I'm a control freak, right? I'm a type A personality and I want to try to fix all the things, but that's not realistic. And there's probably some of our attendees that feel the same. So how do you like navigate that storm of all the things?
Yeah, so it is heavy. It is heavy out there
It is.
to deal
It
with all the
is.
issues. Um, so the way I have a tendency to navigate, and I just listen to again to that still small voice. I don't know. I I think maybe some of us were chosen for certain um, things that we're supposed to be doing, whether it's teaching, writing, being an artist. Some of us are chosen. Again, going back to that's our calling. Have a tendency to focus on things that are hopefully going to be the greater good. And I will say that I focus on things um, that is going to help and protect the earth and other species that inhabit the earth. And if humans benefit from that, that's great. But that's not, I'm just being transparent, that's not my focus.
Right.
Humans are not my focus. I
Right.
almost hate to say that, but it's because not that they're, obviously um that is important, especially those that don't have a voice of their own. But neither does the earth, neither does other species that inhabit the earth. Um, so I have a tendency to navigate towards that. But really, like Deborah and others here, I'm in everything: women's right, environmental justice, social justice, democracy, all the things that I can get into. Wherever spirit guides me, I guess, is where I'm going to go.
Got it. I love that. So we're going to actually pivot to a question that I think can play off of that. So, Mary, you just mentioned all the things that you were involved in. Dolly, can you tell me what forms of community or sisterhood sustain you as you continue to speak into the difficult or environmental or politicized spaces?
Well, this allows me to bring in something that I've been wanting to say for the last few minutes, actually. One of the issues that hasn't come up at all is religion as a topic and the challenge of having different views religiously than, say, the majority in one's environment. I was reared Catholic, a strict Catholic, always a minority in the sense that my hometown was more a hard shell Baptist town. But when I broke away from Catholicism, I spent 20 years as an adamant existentialist, and that evolved into what I now call mystical humanist. Well, that's not something that's easy to explain to just the average Joe out there. um, my memoir is very much a philosophical memoir. My small memoir that I published a few years ago focuses on that evolution. And I find that to be, when you talk about courage, in a town like Pensacola, religion is one of the things that often separates people, um, because most people here are Christians and not identifying with typical Christianity, and being able to clearly say that you are, in my case, I say Unitarian Universalist, which nobody's ever heard of here, or many people have not. Um, that in itself is something that would require a little bit of courage, except for me, it doesn't, because my feeling is either somebody's just going to ignore it because it means nothing to them, or they're going to ask me questions and I'm happy to answer them because I'm never going to be something that I'm not. But I do think we often overlook that religion is one of the issues,
Mm,
along with race and climate and these things, until an atheist can become president of the United States. And I don't consider myself an atheist, I address that in the book. But until an atheist can become president of the United States, we don't have freedom of religion
mm.
in this country. And it's something I feel very strongly about, and I feel like we need to address more, and we need to all be able to be free to say whatever it is we believe about higher powers or religion or whatever. And I have grieved over the years for the people, for example, who were Islam, who were Muslim.
Mhm.
I lived in Turkey, and I absolutely loved the Muslims that I knew in Turkey.
Right.
And when 9/11 happened, it broke my heart that some Muslims I knew here were being broad stroked, feared or rejected or whatever because of that. I do think that too often religion separates rather than brings people together. And a big part of what I consider my mission is not only to speak out about the things I believe, but to look for ways that we can link human being to human being, whether that's across different belief systems or race or gender or whatever. And I don't want that to get lost in this discussion.
Thank you for that, Dolly. So, let's try to focus on some of that as we think about some of the questions going forward, right? The intersection of all of our identities. As individuals, we are all very, very dynamic. And whether we be um, Black, white, Hispanic, Lebanese, Asian, from the United States, from another country, neurodiverse, having a physical disability, our traditions, backgrounds, cultures, all of those make up our whole identities, whether we're straight or gay or trans. Um, what we're focused on really truly here is the word, the voice that we all have, the power that we all have from that, and all of the rest of that that's part of us. We don't want to lose it by any means, Dolly. And Deborah had talked about, the spiritual, right, guidance without speaking about a specific religion. But that is a piece of all of our identities, and it influences our voice, all the different pieces of us, how we grew up, our backgrounds, the experiences that we talked about in the beginning of this, and all the different emotions that created for all of us. That shapes our voice. Um, so let's talk a little bit about how do we take that voice and how do we transform some of those emotions that we get from it. So, CG, I'm going to go to you. How do we transform like anger, grief, or frustration into language that can actually move readers rather than overwhelm them?
So I'll be transparent. I mean, I was overwhelmed in the process of by my emotions, in the process of writing my book. I think part of the sort of the convergence, the healing process, and the creative process was that I was overwhelmed at certain points. So I was writing a little vignette about my grandmother, and part of the grief process of losing my dad was also sort of re-grieving other losses and revisiting those losses. So I think, grief kind of, like if you think of it as a chronic condition, so I would have, I still have flare ups, right? Like,
Right.
so
We're human.
we're human. Yeah. And so I was writing about my grandmother, and it was just a very vivid memory I have of sleeping at her house, and I had had a nightmare and was kind of babbling in the middle of the night, and she didn't really know what I was saying to her. And I just remember waking up and she was like clinging to me. And I got through that sentence, and I like couldn't breathe. I was crying so hard. I hadn't my grandmother was in her late 80s when she passed, so it just felt like a very natural thing. But like my dad's sort of early death and unexpected death sort of, kind of re-brought that up. So all that is to say, I think the not feeling overwhelmed is not necessarily what I was working towards. But I do think that there are ways to sort of, as you're writing, convey things to other people in a way that they can also find the clarity that I was finding as I was writing. So humor is one of those things. My daughter doesn't think I'm funny. She thinks her dad's funny. She tells me all the time, you're not funny, daddy's funny. And I'm like, you'll appreciate me in about 10 years. But
Right. Right.
uh,
That's so fair.
but like humor is one of those things that so some of the sharpness, right? And then also just vulnerability, I think, just being like radically vulnerable is not something I might have felt comfortable doing, even 5 years ago, and putting that
Yeah.
out there, for hopefully a wide audience, but I just feel so I feel so secure in myself going into year 40.
Mm.
And I feel so secure in my experiences, I think, and sort of how I have like processed them. And it comes through in the clarity of my writing. And so it's like process and product, right? Um,
Yeah.
I processed and then I produce, as I was producing. So yeah, I think, it's finding the clarity and it's feeling the feelings.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Mary, I want to ask you the same question there. How do you transform some of those emotions, whether it be anger or grief or frustration, into a way that readers don't feel overwhelmed, rather moved instead?
Um, I try to write in a way that is relatable to them. Maybe not the whole piece, but parts of the piece. And I really do try to in pieces, whether it's a poem or a memoir, um, on hope, something hopeful.
Mm.
Whether it's we're talking about the climate crisis, whether we're talking about the death of somebody you love, depending on what the situation is. So, you start with a story, you go through the emotions and feelings, but then you also offer hope. And my hope is that they don't feel quite as overwhelmed, and they go away feeling that maybe it's going to be a tough road, but they'll get through it. And there's other people out there that have experienced what they're experiencing now. So I try to focus on that, um, lifting people up essentially. Um, whether I'm talking about, my personal experiences with all those things.
Got it. Thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Mhm.
So, Dolly, I want to have you jump in, but a different question for you. How do you balance storytelling? So when we've talked about emotions and we've talked about all the dynamic beings that we are, and we're actually multi-identitied, right, as individuals. How do you balance storytelling with advocacy? So when you're talking about, some of the racial stuff or the political stuff, how do you balance those two so that your work remains artful, right? You talked about you were born a creative. How do you keep that artful and impactful piece there and balance the two?
I really think stories are the answer. I really think
Okay.
stories are the answer to so much in humanity. If I can tell you of my experience of my husband choosing to die after his dementia and stroke, and I can bring that to life for you, then that's going to build a bridge with us, no matter what your attitude might be about that choice. The story, I think, is the power. And
Mm.
I actually have a deep faith in story,
Okay.
whether it's fiction, nonfiction, memoir, poetry, whatever form it takes. And for me, it takes all of those forms and then some, other kinds of nonfiction as well. Using story is the power to bridge to make bridges between human beings. If instead of arguing and fighting about politics, for example, people can find it in their heart and their experience to show how this happened to me and this is
Mm,
how I felt. And then
I love
somebody
that.
else can say, this happened to me and this is how I felt. Even if those two seem diametrically opposed, they are very likely to find a way to connect.
Thank you for that. So I'm actually going to take that and I'm going to take another question, but I want to pivot this to your other three peer authors on the call here with a little bit of a I think a twist to it. So coming off of what Dolly just said, what techniques or rituals help you write about politically charged or racially fraught topics with clarity and courage? When you're thinking about that storytelling, when you're thinking about that connection that Dolly just talked about, how do you keep yourself, focused on that? So, Mary, we'll start with you. What techniques or rituals help you write about politically charged or racially fraught topics with clarity and courage?
I mean, obviously, it's going to depend on the subject matter and what direction I want to go in and what I'm trying to convey. I sort of just have a process where I just what I refer to as throw up on a page.
Okay.
Um, and then just I get it all out or whatever. And sometimes I'll let it sit because that's obviously very raw and emotional. I'll let it sit and then I might come back a couple hours later. I might even come back a day later. And then I go back through and hone it. And, I don't want to say perfect it because there's no such thing, but I work on making sure I'm conveying what I want to convey and that the message is clear. And then again, that there's hope. There's, a light at the end of the tunnel, or so to speak. So I don't really have like techniques per se.
And that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, I do like the word ritual. Um, so that would probably be it. Just throwing up on the page and then just working on it from there.
I love that. I love that. CG, what about you? What's your ritual or technique if you have one?
So I don't over plan, I think. I kind of have a loose idea going in of some beats that I want to hit. And then I sort of like trust myself to take it where it needs to go. So like Mary keeps coming back to you have to give hope, you have to give hope. And so one of the short stories in my debut book, which is a collection of short story and poetry, my initial plan was to leave it at like the bleakest point possible. Um, so it was an environmental, lots of environmental themes in that piece, where like there's an eye sort of literally like watching everything, as climate change sort of destroys the earth, but people persist anyway. I was initially gonna have it ending with sort of my worst nightmare, which is like having to choose, death for me and my child, or just putting myself in that future scenario. And then I got to that point in the story, and I was like, I'm not done. It's not over, right? Like it's not. This isn't authentic. That's not what I actually believe. And so it does end on a note of hope. So I think largely I work through like symbolism and allegory. There's another short story in the collection where there's a coven and they're in a garden, and the intersectionality of the garden paths kind of speak to the intersectionality of everybody that's needed to sort of move us forward. So I like to deal with metaphors and I like to deal, in symbolism, but to make it like transparent enough what I'm trying to say, right? But I do think like going in and kind of again what Mary was speaking to, like letting things be really raw and trusting yourself to get that first draft down, and letting it go where it feels like it needs to go, and not sort of limiting to yourself because, well, I am too emotional right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you don't want to. And then often, like I think what comes out of that first real raw draft is what needs to happen either to get to the final piece or it is the final piece.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, it's raw. It's the real emotion from that, initial thought, reaction, whatever. So, and that's great. So, Deborah, follow up then, how do you really, you know, balance, I guess, where were we at? I'm sorry. What techniques or rituals was it, right? That you write about, um, or how do you do that how do you keep yourself focused or whatever in that politically charged or racially fraught topics? Like, what do you do? How do you keep that clarity and courage in there?
So I have a tendency to bring the um, the lessons and the stories from the past forward and use them in my writing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then lay them beside the events that are currently happening.
Mm,
And then I infuse those stories with moral clarity and use examples as teaching moments
mm,
um,
okay.
to help and expand on that to help um, my audience to have a bit of clarity, if you will.
Yeah.
I try my best, and I hope I accomplish that, not to preach at or to people. So
Hmm.
what I normally do is I have a couple of special people that I'll run my poetry through to make sure that I'm not preaching at or to people. Um, but that is normally what I end up doing. And a funny thing happened on the way to my poetry. So initially, I wasn't doing any of that. I was just writing regular poetry. And then we ended up with particular people in office.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
My poetry took a turn.
It evolved.
It evolved.
Hmm.
Yes.
As we
And
all do.
I felt the need to start addressing the issues and the things that were happening in our country.
Mm-hmm.
Fair. Fair.
And I felt the need to start using my voice and my writing as a platform.
Mm. So let's take that. Do you mind if I stop you there and keep us moving? We're going to dig a little bit deeper in that because we've
Sure,
got less than about 30 minutes left with our attendees. So
sure.
let's try to focus in on some of these other questions. We're going to dig deeper together. So
Okay,
let's talk about trying to use your voice.
okay.
And especially considering the times that we're in. So it's no surprise. If you haven't been living under a rock, you know that voices, especially women's voices, and I want to be careful because we have some allies on the call with us tonight, right? That either are not a woman or don't identify as a woman, and that's great. So, but let's talk about that topic specifically. I'm gonna versus having all of you maybe chime in on some of these. I want to make sure we hit some of these hot and heavies, so we might kind of bounce around a bit. Let's go with you, Mary. So you mentioned earlier that you feel like, or people may have said that you're white passing, but you're definitely not white. So you're put in these positions sometimes involuntarily um, to potentially hold space for other women that may also be women of color, and people may not be receiving you as a woman of color. What does that mean to you? Like, how do you do it? What does it mean to you?
Um, I'm grateful that I have the capacity and ability to hold other women in the same situation in space. Uh, it is incredibly um, infuriating and I guess sad to have to walk that line.
Mm.
but but to let other women know that they can do it, but to when they walk away from a certain situation, and I hope this is making sense, to make sure they have a safety net, to make sure that they um, are taken care of, whether it's self care or they have friends, family. And I say that because I've been in situations, and I'm sure other women have, where um, because I'm white passing, I've been in certain social situations where there was language and references made to other people that probably would not have been made if they realized that I was not white. So,
Right.
um, so you walking away from that, of course, I said something, but walking away from that, I had it. You have to protect yourself. You have to do self care. So,
Mm.
um, I've always made sure, especially the youth, I've always tried to make sure that, when you walk away, make sure you take care of yourself. If you're angry about something, make sure you channel that into something positive or something that's going to matter, or change the situation that we're living in. Something to that effect.
Got it. CG, what about you? What does it mean for you, to hold space for other women, especially women of color, and maybe through your writing?
Um, I never want to speak for anyone, especially an experience that I haven't lived. So for me, it's about listening. I'm a teacher and I teach American literature. So even into my, late 20s and 30s, I was educating myself about, you know, things that I hadn't been taught in school. So, like Tulsa, the massacre in 1920. That was news
Mm.
to me, and I had been through AP US history and I had been through, a college and a master's degree. And this was all new. This was new to me. Um, Wilmington, 18, whatever, 60, whatever, during Reconstruction, we had more Black representation in Congress during Reconstruction than we do now. And these are things that I now share with my students. And I live in upstate. I live in New York. It's a blue state, but I live in a conservative area. And so every day that I teach one of these completely verifiable, factual, historical events, I teach Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad. So these are books that if I were living in another state, I might be fired for handing to a student.
Mm. Very much
So
so.
I do it with um I don't want to say a certain amount of trepidation because I feel very comfortable doing it because I have my arguments are in place for why this needs to be taught, why this is valid. But very much with an awareness that, this would not be accepted elsewhere, and is not necessarily going to be welcome to all ears, but it's
So
absolutely something that needs to be heard. Yeah.
So let's stick with that, and just a
Yeah.
quick response on this, but you kind of alluded to, this is not acceptable elsewhere, and there could even be lashback, especially as a teacher, even in the area that you're in. So let's follow that up with when you anticipate backlash, how does that shape or not shape what you're going to say or even your writing process? Does that change how vulnerable and how open you are?
Um, I get scared and then I get angry at it, I think. Um,
That's
I get angry that I am scared and then I do what I'm going to do anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. So tell me.
So,
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah. No,
yeah, I
CG, thank
mean,
you.
Yeah.
like full transparency, I'm a signed author with Luminary. The number of times that poor Brandy has had to like talk me off the ledge, like, oh my God, this story that I'm publishing is going to get me fired, or they're going to come after me with pitchforks. Like, it's definitely like, whatever. I have anxiety. I have anxiety disorder. I'm on,
We're
whatever.
human. We're
Yeah,
human, right? But I
yeah.
think this is
I'm
real.
on
I
100
think this is real.
antidepressants.
Yeah.
Um, but like it ultimately just comes back around to this is what I believe in, this is what I want to do, this is what's right. And I'm really good at a very pointed um response with very fact-based rebuttals,
Mm,
and it is very helpful to be able to speak clearly and communicate clearly and shut people up.
yeah.
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 And so anybody that's worked in education has had to shut people up,
Yeah.
because they want
Yeah.
to come at you for whatever.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you come at it with an argument that can't be rebutted, uh,
Mhm.
it makes it very difficult to, um, to really feel the fear of somebody, coming after you with pitchforks. At some point, and I know we kind of live in a post-truth reality in a lot of ways, but in some ways we don't.
Yeah.
And
So
so,
let's take, sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, and
Thank you
so
for that.
yeah, I mean, do I get freaked out when I hand students a book every year? Like, oh my God, um this is gonna screw
This
up my
is
whole
going to
week.
be the pink slip, right?
This is gonna be a pink slip, or this is gonna be just a problem for me, and I'm gonna have to deal with it, and it's gonna be tears, and it's gonna derail my week. It's not gonna get me fired, maybe, but it's just let's use the word, it's gonna fuck me up for a little bit.
Yep.
Um, I do it anyway because ultimately it's what I want to do.
Thank
And
you
it's
for
what I
that.
want to say, and it's what I want to write, and I know it's good, and I know it's just and it's truth, and I can back it up.
Perfect. So, Dolly, I'm actually going to come to you. I'm going to ask you the same question because, if audience members, if you have not read Dolly's robust background, she told you earlier that she's been around for a while. She's had a lot of experience, and part of that was also as an educator. So, Dolly, just being mindful of time, I'd love to kind of understand from you when you anticipate backlash. You mentioned that you used to teach Black studies, right? You were an editor in the past. You were an educator in the past. You're a writer, and you talk about a variety of controversial things. When you anticipate backlash, how does that shape or not shape what you're going to say or write? And if it doesn't, just say it doesn't.
Well, first of all, I was relating a lot to you as a teacher because many years ago, when I was in public education, and I did do the Black studies, and I taught existentialism and journalism and the newspaper, and I was extremely controversial, and I did lose my job. So it can happen that you will lose your job, and I hope it doesn't happen to you. But I address this also in this little memoir, Scars to Stars. And the reason it's entitled Scars to Stars is because so often in life, the very thing that seems awful at one moment becomes a blessing in the other. Like if this wouldn't have happened, that wouldn't have happened.
Mm,
So I remind myself of that a lot, that often the things we're most afraid of either never happen. That's what I've found
mm.
lately. Lately, I've been more concerned not about losing my job because I don't have a job to lose, right? Which is very freeing. You don't have to worry about that. I mean, I could be shot or something like that. But even so, I'm pretty alone in my life. So, yeah, you know,
Yeah, and
there
I
is
think
there
it's a
is
great point.
there is a freedom that comes with being older in that regard. You have less to lose, and yet you still have the same impulse of what needs to be done or needs to be said, and feel freer. I think to do it. Or I always did it anyway, but I'm less likely now to have the fears materialize or have them devastate my life. And one
Yeah.
thing I've been very happy about, and I really want to say on this program, is that sometimes the concerns that I have had really didn't come to pass. I think sometimes we let ourselves be too thwarted, too muzzled by the things that could happen if we
Mm.
say this aloud or if we write this or send it to that audience or allow that audience to be exposed to it. And I just find that authenticity rarely really has a negative effect. It can, but it rarely really does.
I like that. We're going to
And I'm
coin.
pleased with that.
Oops. Yeah.
I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. And thank you for that. I think we're going to coin I always did it anyway. That's,
Yeah.
you said I always did it anyway. And
Yeah.
Mary has alluded to that
Yeah.
tonight. You've alluded to that tonight. Deborah, you've alluded to that tonight. So, in our last couple of questions here, because I do want to leave a couple of minutes at least for our audience members, if there's anything that they'd like to add or ask. From the discussion tonight, but there's a couple more that I want to hit here. And I want to just, again, double click in a little bit more. So let's just say, again, being mindful of time, how has being a woman shaped the way your voice is received when you write about power, race, justice, or the environment? If you have a very specific example that you think really talks about how you have been shaped from that, I'd love to hear it. So, Mary, what about you? How has being a woman shaped the way your voice is received when you're talking about the environment?
That's a really good question. Um, and it is sort of difficult for me to answer, but I'll try to be succinct. It's difficult because as a woman in the South, what do I know?
Mm,
Even if I'm an environmental scientist, I'm educated, on these issues, but there still has been a struggle with my voice being heard. There obviously are some that, listen and things of that nature, but it has been a struggle as a woman, and it might be even a struggle as a brown woman,
mm,
because especially white males, and I'm sorry, I don't want to offend anybody. Um, it's been they've been dismissive, I guess is what I'll
mm,
say. So,
mhm,
um, however, that is does not. I'm not fearful of that. I'm gonna, like we've said before, I'm gonna do what I'm called to do, whether or not people want to hear it. And obviously incorporate the perspective from a woman, somebody as a caregiver, not just to others but to the earth. Um, it just needs to be said. It needs to happen. So, taking what I've experienced in life and sharing that with others, and talking about the environment, because everything's connected. We're all connected. We're all connected to the earth and nature, to each other, whether we want to admit it or not. So,
yeah,
that's it in a
that's
nutshell.
fair. That's fair. Dolly, after you've had a chance to swallow your sip there, I'd like to hear from you. Again, you've mentioned that you have been, doing this for a very, very long time. So when we think about your experiences from the 60s until now, how has being a woman shaped the way your voice is received when you write about some of these, you know, um, difficult topics, confrontational topics?
Brandy, I have to say, I really was very fortunate in my young years at a time when so many women weren't having opportunities. I really did. I mean, when I got on the newspaper, the daily newspaper, and within 2 years I was editor of that paper, I know that that is because the general manager there was an unusual man. Now,
Mm,
I was an unusual woman, but he was an unusual man. And I've looked
mm,
back on that, and he was from the North. This was a Southern newspaper, daily Southern newspaper. In the late 60s, women, especially young women, were not editing daily newspapers. I mean, that just was
mm,
what was happening
mhm,
at that time. And I don't think I fully embraced it or realized how unusual it was then. I've had to get old and read all these books about the 60s and think, oh my God, was I lucky? I don't think I just sort of, maybe I expected it. Maybe I felt entitled. I don't know. I don't know why. I did not grow up in a family of creative people at all. I grew up in a family of
mm,
business people, and I had not one ounce of practical bone in my body.
Yeah.
But I do feel I was very, very fortunate. And then I feel like everything else kind of built on that. And maybe if that hadn't happened, maybe a lot of the rest that happened wouldn't have happened. I don't know. Um, what One of the things that is different now, I never thought that I would be so worried about democracy. That was not something per se that was big on my mind. Yeah, racial
Yeah.
issues, yes, women's issues, yes, religious issues, yes, all sorts of things like that. But democracy, the very core of America, no, that's only been in the last 15 years that I have been sorely concerned about that and
Mm.
written about that. I did a 10-part blog. I couldn't stand to do it any longer because I'm somebody that when I write and I edit and I edit and I edit and I edit. I do not do fast writing. I mean I might write something fast, but that's not ready for prime time. I write and keep perfecting and perfecting. So a blog was a terrible thing for me to do because I was putting the time in that I might have put, that somebody else might put into a book or, something for a major publication. But during the time that I did it, several of my Dr. Dolly's musings, I think is what it is. It's still available. Anybody can see it, the series. But half of that series really became about the political situation with a focus on democracy. I did not anticipate that a decade ago,
Mm.
and
Fair enough.
who knows what it's going to be in the next decade. I mean, that's
True.
one of the exciting things about life, one of the distressing and exciting things about life. Who knew that we
True.
were going to live through a pandemic? You
That's
know,
right.
who knew
So we're
what
going to
that would,
pivot.
huh?
We're going to pivot from there, Miss Dolly. Just again, being mindful of time.
Yeah, yeah,
I
sorry.
know you have a lot to
Oh,
share
sorry, sorry,
because
sorry.
that's okay, because you have a very robust history and background. For those, I think there were some questions about where you can find information back on the event page. Miss Dolly does have her information listed in her bio of where you can find that information online. I see that Mary, you were able to add some things. CG, Deborah, if you want to drop something in there, oh, you just did. Fantastic. All right. So, last question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience here. So, I really want to, Dolly was talking about privilege, and we did not even get to the chance to scratch the surface of privilege. And privilege, sometimes that word gets a negative connotation to it, but everybody actually, for the most part, has some privilege in some kind of way. I consider myself privileged because I have the ability to open up a publishing company to help support diverse voices that might otherwise go unheard, right? And sometimes we don't really think about the privilege that we have. And we all have voices, whether we're comfortable enough to use them or not now. And sometimes we don't think about our voice mattering because we have privilege, but that's even more important. Let's talk about the fact that we can get into maybe rooms that others can't. We can hold conversations that others can't. Are we making space for other women, that look like me, that don't look like me, that are generationally older than me, that are generationally younger than me? So we're going back to the premise of this call today is like our words have power, our voices have power. And the last thing that I really want a couple of you to sound off on. I think I'm going to go to Deborah and Mary on this. When we're thinking about our voices and we're, CG, you talked earlier about the vulnerability behind using your voice and how it can be uncomfortable and the fear and the hesitation. I want Deborah and Mary to talk about the opposite side of that. You maybe had the fear, but you overcame that fear and you put your words out there, either vocally in writing, and then somebody twisted it. Somebody downplayed it. Somebody, tried to use your ideas, your words, your writing for their own agenda, right, wrong, or indifferent. how do you keep control of that narrative? Deborah, I'm going to go to you first and then Mary next. How do you keep control of that narrative, Deborah?
For me, because speaking publicly doesn't come natural to me, I prefer kind of a one-on-one audience. I have to force myself to stay on topic, because what people tend to do is they tend to invite quarrelsome arguments into your space to derail your message.
So how do you stay on that? Just, we got about 4 minutes. I want to drive us to home. So how do you stay? How do you do, like
I
keep
stay
on track?
focused. I
Okay.
stay focused. I stay focused, and I don't allow them to derail me by bringing in apples when I'm talking about oranges. I
So
don't
stay
allow
focused.
them. Yeah, I don't allow them to bring in foolish controversies that and vague arguments that have nothing to do with the message that I am talking about.
Fair.
I don't allow them to sideline me, and I don't get into arguments that are meaningless, because you're not going to satisfy them. They
Right.
came to pick a fight.
Okay. So Mary, tack on to that. How do you keep the narrative?
It's essentially the same. I just maintain my focus, and I know what I want to say. I know how I'm going to say it, and I don't let anybody derail me from that. Because typically people that do that have their own hidden agenda, and
That's right.
it's usually malicious. At least that's been my experience. I don't have time for that. I don't. The universe doesn't have time for that. We've got enough going on. So sometimes, again, focus, ignoring them, calling security to take them out. I don't know, situation. So,
All right.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I like that. So, as a quick recap, and attendees, we have a couple minutes left. If there's any pressing, burning questions, if you don't have the information that you need, or that you're able to, that you feel like you need in the chat, or either in the bios on the original Eventbrite event, to be able to connect with these writers and authors, you can always reach out to me too at luminarypublishinghouse.com, and I can get you connected or tell you where you can find these authors. But I want to just drive home for those that did join late. While we didn't get to go super deep on some of these things, it is really about starting the conversation. This today was a start of the conversation. This today was, you're not alone. You're not the only one thinking, I have something to say. Or you're not the only one thinking, I have something to say, but I'm scared. Or you're not the only one that says, the hell with it, throw caution to the wind. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to say it anyway. You do have community out here. Your voices are powerful. Again, like we said at the beginning, words have power. So we hope that at the end of the day, this has encouraged you to use your voice, find your voice, grow your voice, or at least find a community where like-minded individuals exist, and know that your voice, your words have power. So with that, if there's not any questions for the audience, we appreciate you taking this time tonight with us, especially in other countries and in other time zones. And we hope to see you like, follow, share, buy the books, or join us again. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for that.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brandy. Thank you, everybody.